Lately there was a lot of hype regarding Signals proposal for TC 39, but I am a bit on a skeptical side regarding that this hype is well deserved, especially if you look from the perspective of the React applications. When it comes down to state management, React is a little bit different from other popular UI frameworks, since React doesn't really provide out of the box a way to manage a global state. We can also say that the state exists inside the React world and outside of the React world. What I mean by that is that if we declare a variable outside of React, we can use that variable inside our React component. But if that variable changes, React will be unaware of that change. So there must be found some kind of mechanism that would allow React to find out that that variable has changed. When on the other hand, the variable exists inside of the React component and that variable changes, calling setState on useState or dispatch on useReducer will force that component to re-render, which would effectively mean that React component will be aware of that updated variable. But when this component will re-render, because setX was called inside of it, another thing will happen as well. React will re-render that component, but also it will re-render all its children. And the reason this is happening is again by design, because the data in the React flows from top to down. Thanks to this behavior, we know that we can pass values from upper components to lower components or from parents to children. And whenever the parent changes, because the value has changed and a new updated value has been passed to a child, we know that React will re-render the child as well. Not because the value has been passed, but because the parent has been rendered. So the child will be rendered with an updated value X as a sort of like side effect or like intentional design choice by the React, which of course can lead to another problem, that the first immediate child of this parent component doesn't need X, but some other child needs that X, which is effectively called a prop drilling problem. So then we kind of end up with two sort of like problems, prop drilling and re-rendering of components. But what if React was aware of the variable that is declared outside of its boundaries, outside of the React, this other variable X? Let's call it variable Y. So I have mentioned that when Y changes, React doesn't know about it, because React only knows about variables that have been sort of like changed inside of it, but not exactly variables, but only specifically when things like setState or dispatch has been called. Mutating a variable inside the React component also doesn't make React to be aware of that change, and it doesn't cause the React to re-render. Declaring a variable outside of the React scope will solve, of course, first of all, the problem that when the React component re-renders, it doesn't affect that variable declared outside of the React scope, but React not going to be aware of its changed either. So we need to find a way to synchronize that changed value into the React, and the way to do it usually was through introducing a custom hook that would call a dispatch. So let's say we use variable Y inside the React component. When this component will render, it will use that variable value during rendering. But when that variable changes, React is unaware of that. So we need to tell React component to render again, and then when it renders, it will automatically kind of render with this new updated variable. So we need to do two things. We need to update a variable, and then we need to cause the component that uses this variable inside to re-render. For years, React state management libraries used technique that was utilizing the useReducer. Since calling dispatch would cause the React component to render, we can change this variable outside of the React scope, call dispatch, and then during rendering, it will use automatically the new value. These days, we have a hook that makes things even easier, which is using external store, which comes with a bunch of extra rules, but otherwise it's more convenient way to synchronize that external value inside the React. So how is it related to signals, you would ask? Signals themselves is an old concept. It's basically an observable pattern for values, fancily put in the new wording called signals. But ultimately just an observable pattern, meaning that it is a value you can observe or subscribe to, and when that value changes, you will be notified. And Daishikato already made a hook or a library called useSignals that uses this signals proposal. But again, signals themselves, they just provide a value that is observable, and they require, and it's by the design, that the library authors or framework authors would implement rendering mechanism on top of that observability of the value. But the pattern is old. So if React team would wanted to implement a state management through observable pattern, they already be doing that for many years. But for some reason, they were not interested. And so the Signals doesn't solve any problem to make life of the React team easier. If you use Signals yourself in conjunction with some using external star hook, you will effectively build a poor man's Jutai library. And that's why at this point I believe that Signals proposal is overhyped, at least from the React perspective. From the perspective of other frameworks, maybe it's nice to have a single interface, but again, I don't know if it needs to be really built into the JavaScript language. Thank you for watching, and until the next time.